Thanks for joining us tonight. Virginians have voted in favor of redrawing the congressional maps here in the Commonwealth. The Associated Press called the race just before 9 tonight.
Take a look at the numbers. 51% of the voters have said yes. Election officials are still tallying the final votes, but at this stage, the AP has called the winner with 97% of the vote in.
So after a very narrow victory in their special election, Democrats were all set and ready to go to draw their super advantaged map in the state of Virginia, throwing out one of the more fair maps in the entire country. Democrats have a slight majority in the state of Virginia, so their congressional map is a 6-5 advantage for the Democrats over the Republicans. A judge, and by the way, the Trump administration has heard about this multiple different times, decided to temporarily stop them from doing so as they resolve a certain number of cases related to this particular ballot initiative, not only in the procedure, which by the way was incredibly dubious, but in addition to that, in the actual question on the ballot. So right now, at this moment, even though the Democrats have their victory, it may be a hollow one, and I think it's important for us to talk about this today. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
So depending on who you're listening to in terms of the media, you're getting two perspectives on this particular Virginia question, and I want to give both of them a reasonably fair hearing. So on one side, which is the Democratic side, they're making the case that Trump and the state of Texas, they're the ones who broke the rules, they're the ones who broke the norms, so Virginia is doing something that is temporarily unfair in order to counteract the mid-decade redistricting that the evil bad orange man called for on television the state of Texas to do.
Texas, how many more seats do you want the Republicans to draw?
5.
And then what if California, New York, Illinois, and other blue states?
Yeah, well,
decide
that's
to do
okay
this?
too, but 5. I think we get 5. And there could be some other states. We're going to get another 3 or 4 or 5 in addition. Texas would be the biggest one, and
So
that'll be 5.
are you calling then for a complete redrawing of the congressional map ahead of next year?
Just a very simple redrawing. We pick up 5 seats. But we have a couple of other states where we'll pick up seats also.
They did, in fact, do it, thus giving Republicans a greater advantage going into these congressional elections due to Texas's redraw of those districts. So again, if you're a Democrat, for you, this whole thing started right there when Trump told Texas to do this. Texas ended up doing this, and after that, the race was on. California ended up responding. Some other red states ended up redrawing their districts. Blue states responded to that. And of course, the crescendo of this, the big victory for the Democrats, was this particular ballot initiative that was going to undermine one of the fairest states in the union, because again, the previous map was a 6-5 Democratic advantage, and considering they have a slight majority, I believe Kamala Harris won by like 3 or 4 points in this particular state, then that makes sense, it's fair, it's reasonable, and the districts don't look all that crazy in this original map. Now, of course, from the Republican point of view, they will point out that Democrats have been doing this kind of gerrymandering and in fact are better at it. They have a bunch more states with even greater advantages. California had a better advantage than the state of Texas prior to this whole process. The Democrats have now strengthened their position in California. Illinois is one of the most gerrymandered states in the entire union. And of course, the Republicans are blocked out from all of New England. Now, I will point out that many New England territories only have like 1 or 2 congressional districts, so that doesn't really count. However, it's kind of inexcusable that the Republicans have not held the congressional seat in the state of Massachusetts, which, by the way, since 1997, they haven't been able to get a seat there, and they had 10 seats back then, now they have 9, and they've also been blocked out of the state of Connecticut since 2008, and they have 5 congressional seats, so obviously, at least one of those theoretically could go to a Republican, but the Democrats have drawn the districts in those states in order to avoid this. However, what I would say is, setting all of that aside, assuming all of that's baked in, and the real issue is mid-decade gerrymandering, that this actually all started with my home state, the state of New York. Because if you guys are unaware, in 2014, Governor Andrew Cuomo signed a law that was meant to establish one of these nonpartisan gerrymandering commissions. And this was a bipartisan bipartisan proposal that was agreed to in the state legislature to draw the new districts in a fair and even way. And the reason the Democrats went along with this is because at the statewide level at the time, Republicans actually held a significant number of seats in the state Senate in particular, and thus it was considered the only way to get around your bifurcated government at that particular level. However, fast forward to the year 2022, when push comes to shove and they actually have to do that, we've had a progressive wave in 2018-2019 and another progressive wave in 2021-2022, and the Democrats realized that they don't actually have to compromise with the Republicans, so they decided that they are going to undermine the independent commission, and they end up passing their own congressional map that ended up being overturned by a court that actually redrew the districts in, again, a nonpartisan way, and those were the districts for the 2022 midterms, where, if you guys will recall, if you guys will remember, the Republicans narrowly grabbed the House from the Democrats, largely led by congressional gains in the state of New York. So what did the Democrats do? Did they say districts drawn, no big deal, nothing to worry about, we'll get them back in 10 years when, of course, this issue comes up again? No, in 2024, they redrew the congressional districts. Now, people will say that they only slightly modified certain districts, but they modified every district that they did modify in order to give Democrats an advantage, specifically weakening Long Island and a neighborhood in Queens that did vote for a Republican. So the Democrats actually did do the mid-district redraw for the 2024 elections, and this is because Republicans had unexpected gains at the federal level, specifically from the state of New York. That is the reality. That is the fact of the situation. This is something that has been going on for a very long time, but it's important that you understand where the timeline actually begins, because everybody wants to be super convenient and pick a moment in time or a data point that is deceptive. But the fact is, the Democrats, even though they slightly changed the districts in 2024 in the state of New York as a form of mid-decade redistricting, they absolutely did change them to the advantage of Democrats, thus kicking this whole thing off. Now, that being said, to the advantage of the Democratic argument, unlike in Republican states where they just redo the districts at the state legislature level, which, by the way, they're actually permitted to do so because, again, this power is rested in the state legislature constitutionally, the Democrats did actually have ballot initiatives in order to add an air of legitimacy to their actions. So in California, they voted in favor of a ballot initiative in order to redistrict that state, and that just was not done in the state of Texas. And by the way, this also happened in the state of Virginia on Tuesday, that very narrow victory that they were able to secure. However, unlike the state of California, there's additional issues with the process, according to the opponents of this actual ballot measure, that they used to even get this on the ballot, and of course, with the question that people were actually voting on. So first and foremost, it's actually a long and arduous process in order to amend the Virginia Constitution, which makes sense. It's a constitutional amendment, and they had put in the fairer redistricting program in that particular state in order to prevent these kind of partisan actions at the statewide level. So obviously, that became an issue. Also, in addition to that, Abigail Spanberger's flip on this, because she promised in August of 2025 on the campaign trail that she would not do this.
Short answer is no. Certainly, Virginia, by constitutional amendment, has a new redistricting effort that was put in place and first utilized after in the 2021 redistricting. Certainly, I've been watching with interest what other states are doing, but I have no plans to redistrict Virginia.
Is also something that is tanking her approval ratings. However, I want to set all of that aside at this moment in time. That is going to be adjudicated in the courts, like all of this is, and I want to focus on the second issue, the important issue in my opinion, which of course is the ballot question in question, because the way that it was written is so comically absurd and ridiculous that this could be invalidated just based on that. And the crazy thing is that there was so much money spent in marketing this particular election, especially on the Democrat side. Estimates range between 70 and 100 million in order to push this to a yes position. By the way, it was 4 times the amount Republicans spent. And again, they lost by like 90,000 votes, according to some reports, although new votes are being tallied, so that can either increase or decrease at this moment in time, and actually examine what they put forward for voters, because I just want you guys to see for yourself how ridiculous you can write these questions, even though, again, by law, you're supposed to write them clear without partisan language. And I want you guys to genuinely ask yourself if this actually follows that particular test. Ballot question. Should the Constitution of Virginia be amended to allow the General Assembly to temporarily adopt new congressional districts to restore fairness in upcoming elections while ensuring Virginia's standard redistricting process resumes for all future redistricting after the 2030 census? Now again, that weasel language on the ballot initiative obviously made to be deceptive, obviously made to sway people in the direction of voting for fairness, because the fact is, nobody is against fairness in our elections, even though clearly and obviously what they're doing is trying to undo the fairness protections that they've had at the constitutional level to the advantage of Democrats. And again, the fairness that they're allegedly referring to is the redraws in places like Texas and Republican areas that they're responding to. So again, this is not 100% clear on the question alone. There is an explainer. I don't know if this appeared on the ballot that makes it a little bit more clear, but even in that, it's kind of also deceptive, because in reality, they already had the map laid out for everyone, which was them redrawing every congressional district in order to make sure Republicans don't have representation. By the way, almost all the districts come from Northern Virginia, where the most Democrats are. It's near the District of Columbia. So yeah, they already knew this, but in their explanation of the change of the law, it is written like this. The proposed amendment would give the Virginia Assembly the authority to redraw one or more of Virginia's congressional districts before 2031 in limited circumstances, in the event that another state redraws its own districts before 2031 without being ordered by a court to do so. The General Assembly would be then able to redraw Virginia's congressional districts. The General Assembly's power to do so would continue until October 31st, 2030, and the Virginia Redistricting Commission would reassume the responsibility of drawing the congressional districts in 2031. So again, this is technically not inaccurate in terms of the explanation right here. They give a good explanation of what a no vote would be just above this with the current law, but I will point out that the purpose of this is to redraw every congressional district. So for them to be like, oh, it's just one or more in the explanation, even though they want to redraw all of them, and by the way, that condition has already been met in their opinion, that somebody is redrawing. That's not exactly clear in this particular bit of information. It's not saying somebody redraws after this ballot initiative goes into effect. It's actually prior to this ballot initiative going into effect, so they could make that clear. And obviously, this makes this vulnerable to a constitutional challenge, and the Virginia State Supreme Court will have to rule on this matter. And by the way, some of the redistricting cases had already made it up to the Supreme Court, California and Texas, and essentially the Supreme Court's position appears to be that this needs to be resolved at the statewide level, because this is an issue for the states. Now, as far as my overall opinion, outside of the fact that I am biased and I don't want Republicans to lose 4 of their seats in the state of Virginia, the fact is this is technically a power of the state legislature. The idea that we have these independent commissions that actually do this work in states that are very partisan controlled is not really a thing. Again, New York is a perfect example of this, but I can see how either side can make a good argument for their side. Again, the New York thing is something you never hear about from the Republicans, but the Democratic marketing machine is much better. They show that Trump clip of him asking Texas to change their districts. That obviously makes it clear to their voters what they want them to believe is going on. And in addition to that, you also have the fact that Republicans don't really go as hard as they should on this issue. So a switch up, a change up in order to do so is going to look like something done at the behest of Trump. And let's be honest, Trump publicly asked for this, and the Republicans nationwide were not ready for this fight. Now, Governor Ron DeSantis is saying that in response to Virginia, he's going to do a redraw. And honestly, this is like the gross part of American politics where we watch the sausage get made. And it looks especially bad for Republicans because the Democrats have the media. But in addition to that, Trump's numbers are incredibly down, and Republicans are likely to lose the House of Representatives, and they may actually lose the Senate in this upcoming election. And that's going to make his agenda incredibly more difficult to actually implement. So yeah, this is where we are. I understand how both parties can make their arguments, but in reality, this is like the dark side of congressional district drawing. Now, with my position on this clear, we are all in the mud at this moment in time, so I'm hoping that my side can eke out a victory because I do in fact want to win. But that being said, a lot of people are taking solace in the destruction of the popularity of Abigail Spanberger in the state of Virginia. But the fact is, Virginia is a state where you can only run for governor one time. So she can kamikaze her entire political career. In fact, any Virginia Democrat can do that once they achieve the governor's seat, as long as they don't want to run for Senate or run for president later on. So yeah, that is the most hollow of hollow victories. What I'm hoping for is an actual victory in terms of the court challenge, because yeah, Virginia obviously rushed through this process. They skipped over much of the process, and the ballot question is written to be deceptive. They already had a fair map, and yet this particular ballot question says, hey, do you want to restore fairness to our elections? Which makes people think what they have right now at that moment in time is in fact unfair. In addition to that, obviously there is rural disenfranchisement, but this is not surprising. And by the way, Democrats very likely to continue this pattern, use Trump as the excuse to progress on this front. And if they hadn't done it already in so many states, this could be significantly worse for Republicans. Also, I do want to point out that eventually we are going to see a bigger shift to red states. This is because of population trends. In fact, if they didn't mess up the census in 2020 to 2022, we would have seen this already. But yeah, looking forward to the 2030 census where we actually see a lot of these seats fall by the wayside in very many of these blue states, and hopefully that will actually fix some problems. But again, those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the redistricting battle and the court challenges. Till next time.